Well, weather-wise, a lot happening in the short term, but big changes are not too far away here, really after the next day or two, and I'll talk about those in just a moment. But looking at the last week, a continued very active storm track across the upper Midwest, just been remarkable here for the last several weeks. And another system on Monday and Tuesday with on the right hand side here are our weekly rainfall totals. These are through yesterday morning, but many areas had some. The yellows here across central and southern, more than 2 inches for the week. Again, much above normal. At my house in Hazlet, I had 1.91 on Tuesday and another 1.61 on Tuesday, just almost 3.5 inches of rain here. And that puts me, at least at Hazlet here, almost 7 inches for the month thus far, and even more than that if you go back into July. So it's just been a very, very active weather pattern for much of the state, but there are noticeable differences across this. Notice as you go northward here into northern lower Michigan and up into the eastern upper, there the precipitation was much less, and we still have areas of really abnormal dryness that show up here, especially for northwestern lower Michigan. So there are a wide range of conditions, but another one, the sump pump in my basement started up for the first time in a couple of years here, not surprisingly, after another 3.5 inches of rain. And for that to happen in mid-August is when we typically have relatively low soil moisture values. It's just really remarkable. But another sign of this crazy season we've had, with too little water early on and then too much later on here over the last couple or several weeks. On the left-hand side here, not to belittle or minimize our temperatures, but it was a cooler than normal week for much of the state. Departures generally ranging from 1 to as much as 4 degrees Fahrenheit below the climate normals. That's especially true as you go up into northern Michigan, up into the Upper Peninsula. I did want to mention again, especially for the portions of the state that have had so much rain here recently. Where does that fit in if we look at the last 60 days? And so what you're looking at here are, on the upper right, totals here for the last 60 days from mid-June through mid-August, and many areas here in the yellow and sort of the browns, 8 to 12 inches of rain have been observed. Some cases more than 15 inches of rain. Very, very wet. How does that relate to normal? Well, it's several inches minimum above where we typically are. A lot of this area of 150 to 250% of normal. And again, that translates in many cases to more than 4, 5, 6 inches of surplus water that are relative to normal. And on the bottom, the two panels here, one is a short-term drought index, and again, not surprisingly, given especially the continuing drier conditions in the northern part of the state, we have everything from again, abnormally dry conditions, northwestern lower, eastern upper, to much wetter than normal conditions, especially across the southeastern, let's say half or so of lower Michigan. Finally, the lower right-hand corner here, our vegetation drought response index, which looks at the surface and water availability. It follows exactly what you see in the lower left-hand side here, and that is that we're short on water in many northern parts of the state, northwestern parts of the state, and in portions of upper Michigan. And with the greens down below that, we've got surplus water. Again, no surprises there as we move into the latter part of August. Degree day totals here, it's interesting to note, where are we right now? These are seasonal totals beginning at the beginning of May, and it's using the 8650 corn degree day method here through mid-August. And in general, most of the state is not very far away from climatology, but we have, given the cooler than normal temperatures of the last couple of weeks, we've fallen off a little bit, and there are deficits now, but they're small in terms of degree day versus normal. The blues here are areas where we have a little bit of a deficit, but again, it isn't much. It translates only to maybe a few calendar days behind normal at best. The largest departures right now are in, as you can see from the map, from central upper Michigan. But again, relative to where we were a month ago, in the last couple months, we've dropped off just a little bit, but it's still not very far away from long-term normal. Well, let's look at forecast, because we've got quite a bit happening here in the short term. Cold front currently making its way through the state. Will be moving into the lower peninsula here shortly, or during the next 12 hours. And ahead of that, a lot of moisture pooling, pretty strong dynamics aloft. We've got a large area, and you can see that here in the lower left, recent radar picture. We've got a large area of, well, light to moderate rain with some embedded thunderstorms in that. So it's a really straightforward forecast. This line will make it across from basically moving east-southeast during the course of the day over the next 12 hours. And here you can see, this is the weather map for tonight. You can see the front almost making it out of southeastern lower by that point in time. But I've also embedded some high resolution forecast model here down to the bottom, because it's a really nice predictable type of pattern in 3-hour increments. And you can see as the line moves across from west to east across the state. It's moving, I would say the convection here moving through during what typically is not a very favorable time of the day. We don't have, where we have more stability, and again, but there's still strong dynamics. There's a lot of moisture pooling ahead of this front, so most areas will see at least something. Probably in most areas looking for a quarter to half an inch of rain. It's a fairly fast hitting system. It'll be through that line in an hour, hour and a half, something like that. A little bit higher totals as we move into northern lower Michigan, maybe some 3/4 inch totals there. But because of the movement and the speed, it's going to limit how much anybody gets. Now, one other thing, so most of the precipitation we will see here during the upcoming day or today will be with that line as it goes through. But as you'll notice here in the afternoon, here's the 2 p.m. and the 5 p.m., we could see some redevelopment of a secondary line or some areas of showers and thunderstorms, especially across, let's call it the eastern portion, especially southeastern lower Michigan. If that happens, probably we're talking about mid to late afternoon into the early evening. So there could be a second round for you there of precipitation. Also, some of northern lower Michigan might be impacted by that as well, but it'll be less widespread and a little bit more spotty than what we see here as this line moves across during the next day. Now, after that line pushes through, tomorrow, high pressure moves in. It's a Canadian origin air mass. It's not full of smoke and from the forest fires, but it's going to be significantly cooler tomorrow and set the stage really for 2 beautiful days. Otherwise, just cooler than what we've been. High temperatures today will be in the 70s in most areas. And then tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday with high pressure over the region. Here's the weather map for Saturday morning. We're looking at a very, very pleasant conditions, dry, cool, a little breezy, but our temperature is definitely a few degrees below what they typically are at this time of the year. Most places will be in the 70s, low and mid 70s for highs, and then lows dropping off. Could see some upper 40s north, but generally in the lower or mid 50s here for the next couple of days. Now, beyond that, very, very important change taking place. The upper air ridge that's been stuck over North America, or at least portions of North America, and has been responsible for all of the heat and high temperature records, et cetera, mostly across southern and southwestern portions and western portions of the U.S. It's going to get a little closer to us. And as that happens, we will see on Sunday a very, very real and noticeable warm-up. And our temperatures will jump from the 70s back well into the 80s, and we could be pushing 90 for high temperatures here early next week, I think, especially across central and southern lower. So also with that, a definitely noticeable increase in humidity as well. So it's going to be, we haven't given up on summer yet. It's going to be here at least for a few days early next week. Going beyond that, it's a little questionable, but talk about the medium range here in a second. But the other thing that's I think very, very somewhat relevant here is that after today, probably no precip for at least a week. With the next chance after today, probably not until the middle of next week at the earliest. And right now, it doesn't look like there's anything organized or anything widespread. It would be hit and miss type of activity if we see that by the middle of next week. So we are looking after today at an extended dry period. So things like forage harvest, that type of thing, you're going to get a good chance here, good stretch of dry weather. And certainly for central and southern parts of the state, this is going to be one of the longer dry periods we've had for some time. Actually, you have to go back to June to see that. So big changes in the here are in the near future. In terms of precipitation totals through the next week, you can see most areas around 1/2 inch, a little bit better than that, northern lower, central lower. This is all from today. So what you see here, that's essentially what is happening right now as we speak, as that line moves through the state. And after that, very little or no precipitation expected through the middle of next week. At least officially, that could change. But again, if there's anything that does happen, it would be the middle of next week at the earliest, and probably later than that. Our reference potential of evapotranspiration, where are we going to be with that? Well, the models suggest a little bit below normal for this time of the year, 13 to 16 hundredths of an inch of water demand per day. You can see the totals here reflect that. But given the warmer temperatures coming up early, a lot of this is driven right now by temperature, but given sunny skies, which are expected, and full sunshine and warmer temperatures next week, I wouldn't be surprised to see values a little bit larger than that, especially as we move into next week. For the medium range, which I mentioned too, again, the changes that occur early next week are reflected here. If you look in the lower left here at our jet stream pattern, that big ridge, which has been mostly farther west, several hundred miles, and with all the heat and problems with that, that gets closer to the Midwest. As a result of that, a large portion of the lower 48 up into the Great Lakes region, you can see forecast to have warmer than normal mean temperatures, and also at the same time below normal precipitation totals. And that's consistent meteorologically with that ridge. The big question is how far east does that ridge actually get? The closer it gets to us, the greater the impact will be in terms of the warm and dry. And it's, as we look at the 8 to 14 day time frame, there's also some evidence of, well, there's some disagreement amongst the model. The model outruns here going out to the end of August and into early September, which suggests that there might be another pattern change coming at that point in time. But at least for the bulk of next week, and maybe a little bit beyond that for a lot of the remainder of August, it does certainly, I think, strongly suggest warmer and drier than what we have been observing here over the last couple of weeks. Finally, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of talk about phenology. And I mentioned with our degree day totals here, most of them are fairly close to the normals where they typically are this time of the year. However, because of the drought earlier in the season, many areas abnormally dry from April, the first part of April, all the way through late June, including an extended period during late April and May where we had very little or no precipitation. And of course, because of that, we had uneven germination in some areas, especially on lighter soils that hold less water. And so we have differences in when crops actually got going and when germination and establishment actually took place. And the concern is about that crop that didn't have the water, didn't have to really get going early on. What happens? Is it going to have enough warmth here by the end of the growing season to make it to through the first kill and freeze of the fall? This what I've shown you here is some output from it's called the U2U corn decision tool. It's located, as you can see the web address down at the bottom here, at the Midwestern Regional Climate Center at Purdue. You can go on there and you can choose a county of interest. I've got Ingham here as an example here, and allows you to change or to select a variety or cultivar of your choosing. I've chosen a 99-day relative maturity hybrid here, just for example. And what this thing gives you, and it's basically is looking at the climatology of degree day accumulation during the season. It assumed a planting date of May 15, which was about where a lot of our crop went in the ground here this season. But again, some of it was very, very dry conditions. And then it traces as the season goes along what was the degree day, the observed growing degree day accumulation on a daily basis versus normal. And one of the things, the purple here is actually the climatological normal. One of the first things you see is that, at least for here for Ingham County, the observed totals were really, really close to climatology for much of the season, and still are at this point in time. So that's one thing. The thing to note here in terms of accumulated GDDs, the red line here, when did we reach silking stage? And then the big question, when do we reach physiological maturity, or black layer, which is the black line up on the top? And of course, to do that, if we haven't been there, what it does is it uses climatology. So all the previous seasons from 1981 through 2022 are considered here, and it gives you basically an envelope spread of what historical accumulations at this time of the year have been. In the middle of it here is the median. That's the one you want to use for planning. The other really, really important part that gives you here in blue, these are the occurrences of first 28. I've used a killing freeze here of 28 Fahrenheit or lower. When did those occur historically? So when do you reach black layer relative to when is the risk? We talked about last year, when does that first killing freeze typically have or happen? And here in Ingham County, climatologically, typically, but you can look at the frequency of these as a little histogram down in the bottom. It's typically late October is when that happens, just like we mentioned last year. And the big question is, well, given when we planted and given how much heat we've had accumulate, and given historically how much has happened in past years between mid-August and that first date, are we going to make it? And in this case, for the 15th, you can see in 95% of the cases here in the past, we reached black layer, enough degree days to reach black layer in almost all the seasons. So it was pretty unusual not to make it. However, and then putting the really worst case scenario, what happened if we planted in very, very dry soils, we didn't get germination for an extended period of time? I've moved now the planting date. Everything is the same here, except for the beginning date, which we've moved back to the middle of June. And of course, we know that there are problems with that, and we get a very different answer at the end of the year. And that is, instead of having 95% of the seasons where we reach our black layer target, we only do that in about 12% of the seasons. Again, makes a huge difference. The lower left-hand side here, these are accumulated rainfall totals. Again, it's an unusual situation because we had such dry conditions early on, and that's what that reflects. That flat line you see there, that's for the Lansing area. Locally, like 5-6 weeks where we had very little or no rainfall, and that accounts for some of that, again, delay phenologically. And so we get very different answers, and it's something I guess we need to worry about if you've got that uneven establishment. But this gives you an idea, at least in terms of numbers, what does the climatology say? Okay. So I'll move ahead here, summarize. We've got our rain for the week is coming in the next 12 hours, but after that, initially cool and dry, but then we move to a much warmer type of weather pattern here, also dry next week. So some pretty big changes coming, and that's what the medium range suggests for a lot of the remainder of August. And with that, I'll move ahead and introduce next week's speaker, which is Dr. Youngsuk Dong with the Department of Biosystems and Ag Engineering here at MSU. He's going to be with us next week. That'll be on the 23rd to talk about these late season irrigation applications. And of course, this year's been a challenge for anybody with irrigation because of too little, and then in some cases then too much. But don't miss that. Youngsuk will be with us here next Thursday. And with that, I'll turn back over here either to Sarah or to Eric for RUP.